Welcome back to yet another ground up SCX24 build. And as you can see, today we're going to be focusing on this beautiful FJ45 body. So this is the 4-door cab version from WTMicro on Etsy. And I've already got it painted up and detailed, ready for the build. And this is designed to drop right onto the stock AXIAL frame rails. So I've got those ready to go, along with quite a few other goodies here to make this build happen. Got some new parts, got some option wheels as always. We'll look at tires once we get there, but I think without further delay, I think it's time to jump into this build, see if we can't get this beautiful body onto a frame. I figured we'd start off this build taking a closer look at the body and the kit that it, all the parts it comes with, as well as the paint and detailing that went into it. So right here on the table, you can see the sliders, the lenses, you get the front and rear magnet mounts, and the magnets are included. So this just replaces your top mount and Velcro, screws right into your body mount posts. So that's nice. And then this is actually notched to sit in the C channel. So this just slides in at the rear to replace the hinge. And then the kit comes with the magnets. So very nice. The grille, the roof, and the bed are separate, as well as, of course, the lenses there. So great little kit, not too many pieces. Everything is basically provided for you. You just have to have a little bit of glue to put the panels on, but that's basically it. So as far as the prep and the paint work, this body comes out just super crisp, printed in resin. And I'll see if I can get this to show you all that detail. Just really insane. So I did not do any prep on the exterior of this body. The only sanding I did was a little light sanding with a sanding stick on the underside of the fenders. There was some little bumps, I think, from the printing process, and the same with kind of the underside edge of the windows. But I didn't do anything on the exterior of the body, and it just looks fantastic. So I started by washing and drying it after sanding it, and then used that white fine surface primer over everything. And then I used the AS19, which is an intermediate blue US Navy color. So I believe the AS line is like Tamiya's military line. And then to give it that classic FJ look, I went with the TS27 matte white on the roof and grille. And man, I think it just looks stellar. That's a great color combo. And then I went kind of nuts with the Black It Out detailing liquid and did panel liner in every panel line on this one, just because I thought with that lighter color, it just popped, and I think it looks really good. So I'm very happy with the body, not hard at all. The most challenging part is just picking up the little details, and I do that with just some fine point paint brushes. And I've got some, flat white, some flat aluminum. Those are the colors I use there. Not very hard. It's just a little bit of patience. I dry brush these raised letters on the kind of the grill and the rear. You basically get all the paint off of your brush. You just have a little bit on there, and you kind of hold the brush parallel to the surface and lightly kind of go over those letters. It just takes a little bit of patience, but it's not super hard. And I think it's definitely worth it to pop out that detail. So I think that just looks really good. So that's really the body kit overview. Just a great value and high quality. Can't recommend this WTMicro brand enough. Just everything I've had from them on Etsy, the wheels included, have been great. So I think now that we've seen this, let's jump in to the chassis. Okay, now comes the easy part. Well, at least if you have a stock Gladiator that's already assembled and you're putting this body on it. So if in that case, you have very little work to do. You've got your sliders, they're set up to mount, so you're just gonna remove the 2 screws that mount the transmission skid and run them through the slider and mount the slider to the transmission skid. You'll take off your Gladiator hinge, and this guy just notches and slides right in. That screws in, you'll glue your magnets. The same with the front, you're gonna remove this threads right in, and then you'll glue your magnet. And then we'll look at the body real quick. So the underside, it's very nice and convenient. Guess where you glue those magnets? You guessed right. They're already marked for you, so that makes it very convenient to get this body aligned with the frame and the mounts. So it shouldn't take much work there if you're starting with a stock vehicle fully assembled. Since we're not, we're going to make a little tweak. So instead of stock rails, I'm going to go for a little more performance here. I've got the Mofo RC Gladiator LCG carbon fiber rails. So I've used these before and I really like them. But really, one of the main reasons I went with these is because they allow for the transfer of the stock ESC support and bracket up front, so I can use the stock mounting system. And then the rear allows for the hinge, so I can mount this up. It won't be able to slot and notch, but it should be the same width and just screw right in there. And then the third reason is because this has a flat bottom skid rail. So a lot of the LCG frames now have an angled rail. So one of his kits, the short bed version, is designed for one of those angled rail chassis. This, however, is not. So these holes are flat, and so is this top surface. So you're going to need a flat rail chassis to get these to sit right, or else they'll be kicked up at an angle with this body. So this should be an easy hot swap and is going to give me plenty more tuning options as far as shock mounting positions. So that is going to be super nice there. Should drop the center of gravity hopefully a little bit, be able to drop everything down. I don't think it drops the tray mounting at all. I don't think it really drops the battery mounting at all. It just allows you to tune your chassis and lower it overall. So I think that's the chassis overview, so we'll see what's next. A few quick notes on this chassis rail system here from Mofo RC. So you'll see here how thick the carbon fiber actually is. So it's much thicker than the stuff you usually get from the kind of cheapo carbon fiber kits like a Jora or OGRC. So much thicker there, maybe like 3 mil, super sturdy. But with that being said, because it's so much thicker than the standard C-channel frame, so you can see how thin that steel is, you're going to need to use the longer hardware that it comes with, and it comes with quite a selection here. So you get 6, 8, 10s, and you get some 12s, all in black. So that's very nice to black out this frame. Usually those are in stainless. So you can see this is the stock hardware, and I believe it's 5mm for that short hardware that typically mounts most of the things to the frame. You also get your aluminum crossbars and some micro nuts to help with the placement, I guess, of shocks and just bracing this guy. So now that I've got it apart, I'm gonna go ahead and have to get the links installed, because the way these sliders install, you can see there's only 2 holes there. So they cover up the holes for the upper links. You can see right there, those will go around the heads of the hardware. So that means I've got to go ahead and get these links on. So I've got Mofo RC's brass Gladiator links. So this is the full set here. So we'll go ahead and get those installed and move forward on this frame assembly. All right, we've got a guest build here on the table. And the reason I brought that out was I just did a slight modification to the frame rails. And the reason for that, I wanted to show you on this build. So on this one, I ended up chopping the frame extension that comes out to the bumper. There is no need for it on this body, and what I found was it was hitting this link. So it was really only an issue on this side, but chopping that off gave me, full compression without hitting anything. And I know I definitely want to get this 4-door sitting low as well, so I'm assuming that's probably going to be an issue. So knowing that, I've gone ahead and modified these frame rails, and being that I knew this from the get-go, I went ahead and clamped these together, did the cuts together, did the sanding together, so these are both perfectly matching side to side. Not that these are off, but I did these individually just by eyesight, one at a time, because I was kind of mid-build when I figured it out. But that's a nice little snub nose there. I like that. Nothing is going to be in the way for sure. So don't know if it's needed or not, but we'll see. Okay, the next small modification we're going to need to make these chassis rails work is a little tweak to the ESC tray. This does work with the stock ESC tray, but there is a little bit of a fitment issue because this is not a C channel, and this peg for the body post actually engages this, so that is basically the stop sliding that onto the frame. So as you can see, that is stopping it before the frame points can actually get to the frame. So we don't want to have it all squeezed in and bent. So I've definitely got to take the shock mount cylinder off, and that will drop it in a little more. But as you can see, I'm going to have to take some material off of this, this actual body post mount above and below this cylinder, just to make that cylinder deeper and make this whole thing sit in, because I want to get these flush to the frame rail, because that is the width of the transmission. That is setting the frame rail width. So just a quick tweak, I think, with the Dremel on that. If I remember from last time, it's not too difficult, but should be no issue. I did test fit this guy, the WTMicro mount, and these screws do not thread in. They just kind of drop in. So it won't matter if I take material out of the ESC tray mount, out of these posts, because I'm not losing any ability to thread. I'm going to have to shoe glue these in anyway. So just something to know there. You've got that ability. But I'm going to make this quick modification and then hopefully get these frame rails bolted up. Well, this thing's starting to look like a little comp chassis. Got the sliders on there, the links in, and you can see this front end got mounted in there nicely. And there's just a little bow to both of these inward, but not anything like it was. I did have to widen out these holes a little bit for proper alignment so I could get these screws in without really stressing this piece and wanting to bend it more. But I just ran kind of a drill bit through there to open that up a little bit. But other than that, this thing went together very nicely. This thing just drops right in. Let's see. So that'll just require a little bit of glue. There's actually some tension on it, but I don't think enough to hold it if you know, had a magnet pulling it up. Sits in there just perfectly, and a good way to kind of check it is take one of these spacer bars, and that way that just barely gets right in there, so that's perfect. Perfect width there. One thing I did notice, placing kind of the body on here, because of the thickness again of these chassis rails, these sliders are pushed out. So instead of the body actually sitting around them, it's actually hitting them, and it won't seat fully and cover them. So the solution to that, I think, is going to have to be sanding a little the outer edge. I would like to just sand that inner edge, but if I do that, I'll actually be taking away the plastic that is actually mounting, you know, the bite point of the screw, and I don't want to do that. So I think I'll just have to remove some of this outer edge on both sides. But I think I can clamp them together and kind of sand them and make them uniform. I don't think that'll be too hard. And then the last thing, a little quirk with this chassis is I thought this would drop right in. And you can see the two holes here. It's got the screw hole and the peg hole for the bumper. But if you look at the stock frame rail, it has this third hole. And that's actually what this is set up for. You can see how far the holes are spaced here. So it slides in, so I can't get to this back hole. I can't use that. So I've test fit this, and I can tighten it down pretty well where it won't move, or I can loosen it just a hair and it can act like a hinge. So I don't think that's a bad deal right there. I may look at using it more like a hinge. I don't know, we'll just see, but I think it's gonna work just fine with just two mount points, one per side. But so those are the little quirks there, and you can see I've got the magnets fit in here just on my assumption. I had to take out a little bit of plastic material on both of these, I guess from the print, to get the magnet to seat in there. And then you can see I've got kind of one sitting on top. So one will recess in there, and then the other just sits right on top of that. So I may go ahead and glue the mount sides on This one I assume is the same. It's got a hole in the bottom, so this one kind of just squeezes up and it's flush with the plastic on the bottom. Let's see if I can get this one out. So you can see it's flush there. So it took just a little bit of kind of squeezing that in slowly to get it to fit in there. So it gives that same recess at the top that the rear mount does. So I think that's how you do it. So I may just like slather some shoe goo on the bottom to glue this in place. But I think that's kind of all the notes on this. So I'm going to get these sanded, I think, and see if I can get this body to actually fit around those. Little change of plans here. So instead of jumping into modifying these sliders and trying to sand those down to fit inside the body, I figured it might be a good idea to actually mock the body onto the frame before I start modifying. So I've got magnets gluing in the body mounts, and then I'm going to take this bed and actually glue that in. That way I can set the final 3 magnets, kind of the body side magnets, on those, and then I'll have the height and can mock it all up and double check it. But until then, I think let's jump into this front axle assembly. So this is going to be very Mofo centric. This is 30% overdrive from Mofo, his V2 stock length CVDs with the little stainless steel retainer collar. Got his, I believe this is the V3 brass axles, the current one on the site. I've got RC's brass steering links mixed in. I've got Mofo RC's brass best servo mount ever, and then some generic, these are Hoplex, just brass knuckles off of Amazon. Then I'm going to make it happen with Fast Eddie's bearings. And then for the rear, not much work, probably just put some grease in there. It's already assembled, so I think we're going to dive in and see if we can't get this done, and then we'll move forward. All right, let's do a quick little run through of this front axle. I got it assembled. It had a few little quirks as always. The knuckles just were kind of binding, and they're still not super loose on turning. But I took a Dremel and took some material off of the bottom of those top mounts. You can see how much sleeve pokes through now. Did that on both sides to try to loosen those up a little bit. I also, once I did the Loctite on both of these mounting screws, heavy axle, I let that set up, and then I backed these out, you know, just maybe like a quarter turn, half turn, and that seems to have helped loosen this throw up a little bit. It's not horrible, but I like this to be nice and smooth. The axle, however, is just buttery smooth. No issues there, which is great. The steering link I did raise up with some black plastic little washers, and that was due to this thickened diff cover and the CVDs. So at full lock, it was coming into contact with the diff, and you can see now it's right above that little bevel. So that's working out great. And then the servo mount, there's a little issue with fitment on top of the brass axle. And I'll show a photo of that. I just took off a little of the blackened, you know, coating there in that slot. And then the final thing was actually fitting this servo on. So this is Mofo's new Black Label 2.0. So it comes now in an aluminum case, and it's got a nice little aluminum servo horn. But the issue I had was mounting it actually to this servo tray. So I had a little bit of an alignment issue, so I thought, well, I'll just loosen these 2 screws that hold the post on each side, let those, you know, be a little floppy. So I did that, and then I ran these 2 in, snugged them in, and then I was tightening these 2 down, you know, snugging them up, and it sheared off one of these screws. And what I realized was that these holes, I guess, were, or at least on one side, was just a hair bit too high, putting pressure on the long screws going through the post. So I took a drill bit and I ran it through both of these servo ears on each side through the holes, and just basically tried to take out material on the bottom to make more of a slot. And that was enough to do it. I'll show a photo of that. So that took the pressure off of that when these are fully tightened down, and then you get the post fully down. So now everything is on there nice and secure, and I have not popped a head off of this screw. But if you do that, you know, luckily for me, I had enough material sticking out to grab it and unscrew it. You can also run a screw in from the opposite end, kind of butt into it and maybe back it off, butt into it, and it'll slowly kind of work it out. But luckily, I didn't have to sacrifice a mounting tab there. So with that said, we're going to keep rolling. Got this front axle ready to go. The back is already ready, so it's already ready already. So I don't know what's next, but let's see. Before we get too much further, I did want to talk a little more about this servo and go through the specs here. So got the servo horn on here, and this thing just looks great. All blacked out, just really nice. You can see that it's just a super tight fit to that tray. I mean, there's like zero space at the bottom, so definitely be careful mounting it. But just a gorgeous servo. So it's the Black Label 2.0, but I believe this is like really nothing like the original Black Label. So much more powerful aluminum case. So let's take a look at the specs here. So 141 ounce inches at 8.4 volts. So that is insane. And then if you don't have a BEC, just like stock ESC, 4.8 volts, 94 ounce inches. So, I mean, this is giving NSDRC a run for its money right here. And speaking of money, this is called the Black Label 2.0, but I think it's lovingly referred to as the People's Servo on Mofo's site. And I believe that's due to the price point, because this thing comes in at like 35 bucks. So that is just insane value for that kind of power. So just really excited to get this guy hooked up and try it out, but I think this is going to be a great little servo. Just looks awesome. Love the graphics on it. It's got the same gear on the front that the brass Servo Beast has. So just super nice. But anyways, I just definitely wanted to go into that a little more, but I think now we can move on. We have a slider and we have a few issues. So as you can see, the first thing, obviously, we've got a nice rake to the rear, which I don't want. You can see how high the front is sitting, and that is because with this snub nose of the FJ, you've got to mount the servo at the rearward position on this servo mount, and that makes the rear end of this deeper servo kind of barely come into contact with that tray. So this JLU type tray has this kind of vertical wall here, so I'm gonna have to take that out and maybe just a little bit of real estate on the tray for some clearance, but that should allow the servo to get all the way up nested in here. So that's what I want. I'm not sure what my overall kind of compression will be. It'll just be dependent on the shock setup, but at the rear, my upper limit you can see is the battery tray. So thinking about this guy maybe being 3S, I'm thinking about ditching that battery tray. That will also open up some height clearance here to be able to use a link riser on that rear diff. So I do have a few of those sitting around, so I think I may go that route and just swap in maybe some of those aluminum spacer bars that came with the frame in lieu of this battery tray, and I think that'll just free up some space there, and then maybe I can ride a battery on the frame. The next thing I did was pertaining to the links. I've got nice loose travel here, or loose articulation, I guess. I took out an O-ring on each side of all of the axle link connections, and these are the ball ends that they have the wider flange on one side. So you want to keep that to the outer side, like especially on these single captured. So take off the O-ring on that side and it's still captured. And then I left the O-ring on the smaller flange, which is inside on those uppers. These double captured, it doesn't matter, it's double captured. So that's basically the slider there. So a little tweak is going to occur here, and then you can see I've got these placed in there. I did mock up the body. It does seem like it's sitting on the sliders with a little room to spare. So I think I am going to have to sand these down to get it to drop on. But I'm going to make a few more tweaks here, and then we'll see if we can't get some shocks on here and actually set kind of a ride height. Quick update here on the slider. So I've got this front ESC tray dremelled out for a little more servo clearance, but the cable that's exiting this driver's side still comes into contact with this mount point for that tray, and I really don't want to chop that off. It provides really the support for this guy here, since it's not screwed in anywhere there. So you can see it's kind of restricting there. Here there's no problem. So I've test fit the body, and it looked like I've got a little bit of space to potentially move this servo to the middle mount position. Right now it's on the rearward, so hopefully that'll be the case. I can sneak this up just a little bit, get that cord maybe clear of this mount and be good on that. At the rear, I've got these all the way at the front top mount, and that is stopping the upper links right before they hit the battery tray. But I would like to tweak that and get maybe a little deeper in the frame, so I think I may still lose that battery tray. And then let's talk about the shocks really quickly. These are OGRC oil-filled long travel shocks. So they come with one spring. You can't remove this threaded retainer. You can thread it down, but you can't get it off. So the only way to take the springs off would be to remove this bottom shock mount. But the piston has no tooltip head, so you'd have to clamp the actual piston shaft to unscrew it. So they make it very hard to remove the spring, even though they just give you one. So I've got some 30 weight in here, and I used some spacers here at the frame, just because these are a little bit bigger diameter. I wanted to get those off of the frame a little. And those spacers, these are actually just spare knuckle sleeves. So they're these guys. So I've got a bunch of these that, you know, a lot of times you'll get spares with kits. So Trio also sells those in bundles. So they make really good spacers, just FYI. But I think I'm happy at least with the kind of the movement here. That's all good. I would just like to get the ride height a little bit lower still. So a little more tweaking here. I'm going to move this servo forward, and maybe we can put the slider to bed. Look at that, nice and low. So I've got a few tweaks to the chassis to go over here, but you can see I've got the body fit on there. So initially, when I tried to mount the body onto the chassis, had a little collision with the top shock mounts. They were basically coming out right here, and so with that spacer and just the diameter of the shock and then the piece of hardware, it was catching right here. So I've done a little tweaking to my shock mount position, as you can see, and I'll pull the body off here in a second and show you a little closer what I did. And then the rear, the same thing. I've done a little position tweaking there on the lower mount. But before I take the body off, let's take a quick look here just at that front clearance. So you can see they're just kind of snaking in. Let's see if I can get this body back kind of centered on these sliders. But there's just a hair bit of room there to the inside body edge. So same with the rears. Have to flip over the body to show that. Okay, we're flipped over here so you can get a better shot here of these rear shocks. So they're pretty close to those inner fender edges at the top mounts with those spacers in there, but they just clear, they don't touch. So let's pull this body off and I'll show you the few tweaks I made here to the suspension. Okay, so starting with the front shocks, you can see I unwound a few coils here. So I snipped 3 wraps, and that just instantly drops the ride height right there, just having shorter springs. So I can still adjust that further if needed, but that helped right there. I did move the servo forward, and that is giving me all that down travel right there. So that is working out just perfectly, and it did just fit within the nose of the body. So it's just behind the grill, working out really well. And then for these actual shock mount positions at the top, you can see I dug up some old 3D printed, these are Mofo front shock mounts. So they give you a lot of alternate positions. These aren't mounted how they typically would. I just found some holes on the frame that lined up and kind of gave me the mounting points where I kind of wanted them back here. So that allows me to get all the way up in here at full compression. It also put these two mount points back at this wider point on the cab where I had more room. So that definitely helped. And then I removed the kind of the little stainless spacer I had, because this is acting as a spacer and this is not as wide. But just the way this is mounted, you can see it kind of rides up and over, and I'm mounted kind of low. The shock body is, you know, spaced well off the actual frame, so plenty of clearance there on each side. So that all works out well, and it acts as a spacer, and it gives me a different shock mount where I've got a little more room in the body. And then for the rear, I did something similar here. I dug out some flex blades. So these are 3D printed, very old as well. I'm out of my aluminum flex blades and kind of shock tuning stuff, so luckily I just had this, you know, sitting in the box from way back, but it works just fine. So again, that allowed me to move the shock point back, and that drops the ride height. It also lets me get a lot deeper into the frame. So I took out the battery tray and I put in this crossbar. You can see right there in that middle hole position, and that is coming in basically right above the links, so they don't hit it. They bottom out first, but I'm liking that. Lots of travel. Gives me a little bit extra travel with that axle, but I think that kind of sets up the suspension where at least I'm happy to move forward. I can always clip coils, drop more, but I think I'm going to wait till I get wheels and tires and wait in it, kind of see where it sits. But I think we're good for now on that. Okay, I've got these sliders modified. Took a little bit of elbow grease, a few tries pulling them on and off, sanding them, test fitting them, and pretty happy with the outcome here. I think they look pretty good. And the body now will drop right on. Of course, I don't have any magnets aligning anything yet, but if I can hold it up here, you can see it slides right around the sliders. Pretty good fit there. The only further little fitment issue I'm going to have to deal with is the front mount. So let me flip it over here. So I don't know if you can see there, the front sliders sit down a little low, and at the rear they're flush. And the reason for that is I have the front mount pulled out, because with that actually in there, the front was sitting a little bit high, so you could actually see the edge of the slider. So right now it's sitting in there a little low. So I think ultimately the solution for that is going to be to take a little material off of the top right here. So I'm going to make that modification, and that should lower this mount down just maybe 2 millimeters and have that body sitting even with the sliders all level across there. And I think that'll take care of that. So I'm going to make this little mod, and then we can jump into this center section here and focus on that empty space. Now that we've got this thing nice and leveled out, I figured it'd be a good time to go ahead and glue in this front mount. So I put a little bit of shoe goo on the threads of both of those screws, dropped them in the post holes, and while that is setting up, I figured we'd jump into the motor and transmission assembly. So I'm going to be using a stock AXIAL transmission, and I've got Mofo RC's new 3200 kV brushless Nano Bam motor. This is the same diameter as the Nano Beast, a little bit longer can, and I want to say just a little bit heavier, maybe a gram heavier than the Nano Beast. And with it, we're going to be using this nice two-piece aluminum motor mount. So this is the transfer gear type. Uses this little nylon transfer pinion gear. It basically sets up the motor in the stock location on the passenger side, nice and low, If you have a stock wheelbase chassis, the battery tray rides right over the motor just like stock. If you've got the Gladiator like this and have the battery tray in, I believe that moves it back and drops the battery tray, so you're still clear of the motor, but it keeps it just in that stock location, nice and tucked. You don't have to cut up the tray or modify or move any electronics, so it's great if you don't want to mess with much. For this, it's really great for the low center of gravity. That's really why I'm going for it here. So with that being said, I've got all the hardware that it comes with laid out on the table, and because this is a different style mount than the typical kind of brushless mount, I figure it deserves its own little install segment. So let's jump into it. Okay, we've got all our supplies and tools on the table here we're going to need. So the first thing we're going to do is just pull off this spur gear cover. We're going to take off this spur gear nut, pull off the spur gear, and then we're going to remove the few screws that hold on that metal motor mount plate. Now that we have that disassembled, we're going to go ahead and install the new motor mount plate, which is actually this deeper plate out of the two. It's not the flat plate. So we're going to get that guy installed. They provide 4 screws with it, but I've learned that those lower mounts on the transmission a lot of times rub the links, especially aftermarket links. So I'm going to start with these button head screws. I'm just going to reuse the stock. Sometimes I've even had to Dremel the heads for these lower screw mounts. But hopefully on these links there won't be any kind of clearance problems. But something to know, I don't think I want to start with these bulkier cap head screws. So we're going to get this guy installed and then we'll go from there. So with our discard pile there, this is what is remaining. So the next item is getting this motor installed. So that is going to be one of these 2 little flathead shorty screws, and that's going to install in this top right hole here. So that will secure the motor from the back side, and that will allow us to put in the longer screws and the transfer pinion while the motor is actually held in place. So let's get that guy mounted. The motor is now mounted up, as you can see here, and I did use some thread lock. So just a little dab there on the threads. So I screwed in that little short screw, left it a little loose, and then I ran these longer screws into the motor just maybe a couple of turns just for alignment here, and then I snugged up the little short screw with the thread locker. And you don't have to over tighten that, let the thread locker do the work, just snug it in there. So I'm going to remove these 3 longer screws now that the motor is in place, and we'll see about getting this spur gear on and the nut, and then I think it's the transfer gear after that. I've got the spur gear reinstalled, and I just set that nylon transfer gear in there so you can kind of see the concept, how that works and where it goes. So the next thing we're going to do is actually install that gear and this spur gear cover. So we're going to take one of these long screws, put it through the spur gear cover, and then slide that nylon gear over the screw and install that whole assembly at once. So then we'll tighten down that one screw and we'll have the spur gear cover on, and we're going to use again a little bit of this thread lock because it's metal going into metal. Here's a quick shot of kind of what you need to assemble here, and then you've got to place this on kind of as one unit, which I can't really do on camera holding it with my finger back here, but it'll go on right like that. So I'm going to get a little thread locker on the end, as I said, get this mounted, and then the last thing we'll run through 2 more screws to secure the mount and the motor. And once that is in, the remaining 2 screws, these shorter ones we've got over here, these guys are going to be the last ones that go in and actually secure the spur gear cover just to the aluminum mount. So those are the last remaining pieces. It's too hard for me to do with the camera in front of me. So let me get this assembled and then we'll see if it all meshes out and runs smoothly. Well, as they say in Australia, too easy, mate. So what initially looked a little bit complex and daunting with all the different parts and pieces and screws was pretty basic when you break it down to the components. Fairly easy install here. So got the spur gear cover installed here, so that was the last step. So you're looking at the 2 long motor mount screws, the long motor mount and transfer gear pinion screw, and then these are the two medium screws that actually hold on the cover. And I like that he gives you that hole for the nut, so you can tighten that or loosen it without having to pull the cover, which in this case would actually, you know, pull all these screws that hold in the motor. So that's nice. If you need to tweak that, you can. So overall, I'm very happy with this assembly. The motor is very smooth. The magnets, I don't feel any chunkiness. Of course, the transmission is just buttery smooth. So setting that aside as a finished assembly, you're left with one extra screw of each length. So that's nice in case one goes off into carpet land. And then of course your OEM discards. And you know, of course we swapped the OEM button heads for these hex heads. So anyways, with that being said, we are ready to pop this guy into the transmission skid and get out the electronics and actually test it. Moving on to electronics, got some of my favorites here on the table. Got the FS2A 4-channel FlySky micro receiver. So you can get that on Amazon. This comes in two pieces. So you get the pins and kind of the bracket is one, and then you get the board. So you just have to seat the pins through the board and put a little solder there on the backside to hold them in, but pretty easy. First one I've actually soldered up myself, so not too hard at all. Then in the middle here, we've got the Furitek Ultimate ESC. So this again, I've used quite a bit. It only comes with the receiver cable, as you see there. So if you're not using a stock battery, which I'm not, I've got the 3S, so I'm gonna need this little JST to a PH2 pin here. If you're using stock battery, you can plug directly into this guy. But this is one of their, it was their top of the line. Now they actually have a higher end ESC, but you can see the specs on this are pretty high, pretty impressive. So the BEC is selectable from 5 volts, 6.5, or 8.4 at 3 amp. And then constant current is 40 amp, burst is 70 amp. So just really great power there, which is what I want for this People Servo. Give that the 8.4 volts it deserves. So I think after getting this stuff hooked up, we'll do a quick test and then we'll go from there. Okay, so I've got everything plugged in here, so I'm going to run through the receiver really quickly. So it does have a button on the back. That's the bind button on the board. And then you can see that button is aligning with basically channel 1. So that is where the servo is. And then the ESC is channel 2. And then the signal cable, the white and the yellow, those are towards the board in the pin. So that is the signal pin. So that's how you plug it up. So to get it into bind mode, you just want to hold this down as you cycle it on. So let's go ahead and do that. Plug that in. And then we will hold that. And that fast flash signals that you're in bind mode. So then on the transmitter, you want to have gone ahead and already set up a model name, because if you don't, whatever you flip this on and bind to, the last RC you drove or whatever, that's what it's going to bind to. So I've already set up a model and named it. So hold the bind button, cycle on. It says bind, it just stays on bind. There is no confirming beep. That's just all you get. So then you just want to cycle this off. So that's off. I'm just going to go ahead and turn this off. Turn it back on. And then we're going to turn this on. We are not in bind mode. There is no fast flash. So now we're going to give this guy a little test. So that's weird. Okay, so we're going to look at the Furitek app and see what's going on here. Well, I feel pretty silly for not catching this. So you can see I've got the transmission pulled. So I noticed I was going to check it in the Furitek app, and I opened up the app and I was, changing the motor type settings and giving it a few trigger pulls, and I noticed it looks like a little striping on the motor, and it is. So it was slightly rubbing right over here, and I've marked it in pencil, so I'm going to go ahead and take a little material off there. But you can see these sliders stick way up from the frame rail. So this motor can hang slightly over the frame rails. So if those sliders weren't so tall, this wouldn't be an issue. So I really didn't catch it. I should have. So that initial stutter that you saw was just me triggering low speed, but there wasn't, you know, enough torque to let the motor actually spin. So it took more of a pull. It was making it stutter. So anyways, I've since, of course, pulled it and tested it off the vehicle. So I'll put the camera on a tripod and we'll give this motor a quick test and we'll see how it should run. All right, so we've got it turned on now. We've got it out of the vehicle. Let me get a hold of it where I'm not touching anything spinning. So in the app, I set the throttle calibration. I updated the firmware to the most current, which was 1.9 on this, I believe. And I set the slow speed to 30%. Those are all the tweaks that I made. Super smooth. You can hear a little bit of noise. I think that's the transfer gear, maybe. You can only hear it at high speeds. I think that's just a little vibration at the transfer from low to high. It's right there. So I may have to tweak my settings a little, but it's really, if you keep on the throttle, it's really pretty smooth. You can kind of hear a little noise. I think that's the transfer gear, but you don't hear it at normal, like low speeds. You don't hear it at all. Just super silent. Feels really nice and smooth as far as the motor and the transmission. Like I don't feel vibrations. So now I've just got a little bit lighter Mofo RC in orange and some faint striping right there around the can, but gives it that lived-in look. So now I think I'm going to modify those sliders, get some clearance for this guy, and we'll get it back in the vehicle and move forward. We've got clearance, and I've got the servo adjusted, turned up to 8.4, so very fast, super responsive. Of course, got the motor and transmission back in, the slider modified, went ahead and got the drive shaft connected so I could adjust these CVDs. So no bucking. Perfectly smooth. That motor's nice and smooth now that it's clearanced. Look at that, just nice and silent. No more squirrel chirping. It was just pinched so hard against that slider that it couldn't move at a low speed, and then it jumped at a little more throttle. But that is alleviated now. Plenty of space, nice and clear, so we are good to go. Oh man, I am getting pretty excited here. So I got the magnets glued into the body side, and man, it fits just perfectly. Just ended up laying the body upside down and setting it in there, and really the sliders dictate where it's going to sit. So I didn't really have to worry about the spots that were marked on the body side. I had a little side-to-side wiggle room with the nose, so I just kind of squared that up, and with it flipped over, I could kind of look at the steering linkage, make sure it was parallel here, and then I kind of measured kind of with a ruler straight down the fender, see where we'd hit on the axle, and made sure those were aligned. I could take my tweezers and kind of fit them in here between the shock hardware and the body on each side, make sure that was equal, so that made it super easy to do that final bit of adjustment. But I think if you didn't sand the sliders by hand like I did, you'd have probably a perfect fitment and wouldn't have to worry about anything. So let me pull it off. Well, before I pull it off, I'll show you where we ended up here on the clearance. So Look at that. Just perfect right there. So that's with the steering dead center. So I'm a little bit low of the grill, and that's full center compression right there. So let me swing it all the way to the extreme here. So we are right there at the grill. And of course this is both sides fully compressed. And that's as far as I can get. I still have a little bit of piston showing, but I'm stopped basically at the mount here. So all of that just worked out perfectly. And then underside, you can see I'm back a little from the spot marked here on the hood, and almost perfect on these rear ones. So back a little bit, but again, I was trying to have this as far back as I could to give that nose room. But again, really the backstop here with the sliders dictates really where this wants to ride. So super easy to get that fit on there. Wasn't any hassle, and no anxiety, no worry about the shoe goo, since there is no clear Lexan. Didn't matter if this smears all day long, which it didn't. Came out really nicely and clean there. But anyways, I think now that the body is good to go, I think we're going to look at wheel and tire fitment. And I'm already looking at these extremely angled shocks, thinking that's going to kill me on tire size. At full lock, I'm just going to be straight into these. So I may have to reassess the front suspension tuning to potentially lean these up, but we'll see. Let's pull out the wheel options, take a look at those, and then at least get a set of tires mounted up. It is finally time for wheels and tires. So I've got my wheel options on the table. These are both new to me. These are the Trio vintage style wheels. They both have brass rings, and they both come with a second set of hubs that give you a little more offset from the body. So I'll probably be installing those just to give me the clearance I need, even with this pinched bed and nose. But just as always, Trio brings the quality. They just look spectacular. And I thought the gray and polished would go really well with the blue and white color scheme, and I think that they do. So I think without any further delay, let's get these mounted up to a set of tires. And for that, I've got the RC four-wheel drive. These are the bigger boggers. So they have the chunkier lugs, and they're in the X2 S3 compound rather than the old style boggers were in a little bit stiffer compound. So I've got one out already. So I think I'm going to go ahead and mount up a set, and we'll do a little suspension clearance testing and make sure that the sizing works, and then I can start thinking about an alternate tire for the other set of rims. Well, after quite a bit of suspension tweaking and retuning, I think I've got this tire wheel combo fit on the truck with clearances that work. I ended up doing some widening on the rear to get some bed clearance here for the tires, similar to what I did on my last build. But I did end up using Crawler Innovations foams in the rears as well as the fronts, and I did about a third cut. So I cut this guy in about thirds to get the width I wanted. And these trails are not vented, these rings, so I just left them unvented for now, but they feel nice and soft and responsive. So happy with that. I'll take you through kind of the chassis tweaks really quick on what I did. So the rear was very similar to the prior FJ45 build I did. I needed to widen it out to get the tire to basically clear the bed at full compression. And you can see I'm barely kind of rubbing it right here. I'm clear. I would love maybe just a millimeter more at least. A little more clearance. This side seems to be about the same here. Just barely kind of kissing it at the top edge, but I achieved that by using these +1 Samix HEXES. So these are 4mm. So I used those, and that kicked it out a millimeter per side. That wasn't enough, so I had some little shims on hand, these little plastic washers. So the two bigger ones here fit around the axle shaft. So I'll show a photo of that. but I slid them in behind the hex, so that shimmed the hex out another millimeter, so that was about 2, and then I added a little washer at the face of the hex between the wheel and the hex. So I'm assuming about 2.5 millimeter width per side added there. So what would be nice is maybe a 3 millimeter, 3.5, 4. So I do have some extended axles on order. So that may be the solution, is getting rid of all these shims and putting in a +4 kit on the rear. So let's go to the front here on the modifications. You can see I did have to lean this shock up quite a bit, and that's to get that full throw out of the CVD. You can see how extreme that is. And at full compression, it's just barely touching the shock. So that was necessary, or it was really going to limit the steering. And so, see, I've got some servo horns out here on the table. I did not add another servo, but what I did do is add a new shock mounting position. So I removed the big beefy plastic ones, and these guys you can see are much thinner, which is nice. So that gives me still just the perfect shim to get this collar off of the frame. You can see that space there. It also gives me adjustability. I can loosen these and go up or down, but right now I've got these almost kind of right to the tray. I may tweak them to lower it and get it right at that tray, but I'm liking that a lot. I did clearance out the back of this plastic ESC tray to match this side that I did for the cord. I was still kind of catching that back edge of the servo. So I think now I'm very happy with the functionality here. I'm much happier without the big bulky plastic pieces. So I'm going to black these out. I just wanted these to be a little more visible while I was explaining this. But I think for now, I do have that +4 kit on order. I've got some more tires coming. Most of my tires in the height that I want, which is kind of the mid 50s, are wider. So maybe that +4 kit will open it up to some more options. If not, I do have some smaller tires to try. But I think for now, while we wait on that, we're gonna work on getting the electronics shoehorned in here, get that all tidied up, and then we'll just have kind of that alternate set of rims and see if there's any more width tuning to this thing, and we'll be just about wrapped up. All right, so we've made quite a bit of progress, as you saw. The electronics and the lighting is in. It was super easy on this one. Just plenty of space with this layout being 4-door. Got those long sliders, so that is really nice. Able to probably do this layout in multiple different ways, but I wanted to kind of offset any motor weight with probably the battery, which is the next heaviest, and then this guy is probably the next heaviest, so just center that up. And then this doesn't really weigh too much, but hopefully that'll kind of even it out side to side, give it a good 50-50. But man, and then the lights, as you saw, looked really good. I'll get those plugged in here again in a second. But can run this small 3S, which is nice, and I can run the big guy, which is, I mean, it's not that big, it's 300. This is 250, but either one of these will fit on that sideboard nicely. And let's see here, let me just pop the body on temporarily. So I want to talk about a few things I did as far as further suspension tuning with this guy. So I don't know if you can notice, but this is a little bit wider. So I ended up getting my order in, so I put on the Mofo +4 kit, which is the V2 CVDs and then the full girth rear axles. So when I put those on, I figured out real quick that these trail wheels wouldn't tighten down all the way with the stock HEXES, and I'll show a shot of that. But the axle just protrudes a little bit beyond the hex, and these trio rims, I guess, have a very thin hub. So you tighten that nut down all the way and you got a lot of wiggle. So ended up still using the 4mm Samex HEXES, use those all the way around. So in reality, I probably have maybe +5. So you can see the little silver spacer, but that's nice because once I weigh this guy out, if I need to tune it, that opens me up to being able to add some of those little 9-gram brass patty weights. So I can just take these sleeves off and put those on. But let's see here. This also opens me up to some wider tires. So you can look how much space I've got there now. So that is just perfect. Height-wise, I don't know if I'm going to be able to go any higher because that's really kind of the front end is limiting that. But you can see this full lock is just crazy. So I'm still, with this tire height, I'm still good. It just kind of pushed it out. It didn't really affect where it's hitting the fender. But so I think now I've got some tires in mind to maybe look at for that second set. But I think I'm very happy with this now. Still got to get the roof glued on, obviously. Haven't glued in this grill, but I think I may. It fits a little bit looser than the last one. Of course, the lights are taped in and they're holding this pretty securely, but it couldn't hurt. But I think some good progress made there, good stance. Another thing I did to the suspension was I moved this crossbar, I guess from down here up to where basically the shock screw into it. Added one down here, and I went ahead and added in a link riser. So this is one of those printed Shapeways link risers, and so I played with a lot of positions, and basically to be able to tie this off, and I wanted to as a limit strap right in the center, I had to lower this down basically to where I've got them, and that is basically hitting the bump there, and the top of that is right at my shock tower. So if I raise those links to the top positions, I was well into this guy, and that's the furthest forward. There's really nowhere else to put a cross member. All of these holes are blocked by the link travel. So, you know, wanting this center point to tie off to kind of made me push those down, but I think that's fine. I've got plenty of rise with those despite. And really the reason I have to have that limiter is for the axle. So with these flex blades, you can see it wants to drop, which that rubber band's not going to hold up the heavy wheels, but what it will do is when you're coming downhill, it's going to keep this body from flopping away from that axle and unloading unexpectedly. So it's pretty much a must when you run these flex blades, and it also keeps it nice and tucked, just a low stance there. So a few more little tweaks there, but I think, man, I'm super happy. And the one thing I didn't mention is the knuckles. I went ahead and swapped on some Mofo brass knuckles, and I'll show a picture of those. Finally got the graphics or the logo flipped right side up on those. So fitment is just super nice. Those other knuckles that I'd modified, they seemed like they were sagging, and my wheels were kicked in, and it was just really bugging me. Just wasn't happy with them, so I went ahead and ordered some new ones when I got these axles. But overall now this is basically a full Mofo parts build almost. So anyways, I think let me get the battery in here, and we'll turn this guy on and take a look at those lights. Okay, battery's in there, and what's nice, leaving this hinge just a little bit loose for that mount, it creates the hinge, so you can just lift it up, turn it on. So that's nice, you don't have to pull the whole shell off, and then it just drops right back down. So look at those nice blue lights, just a kind of a hint of blue, not super blue, just some ice blue. But I think those look really good, especially with the nice blue here. But that's the lights, that's the electronics, that's the suspension, I think, finalized. So Let's take a look at the alternate wheels and tire selection here. Well, I don't have all the tires in that I ordered. I don't have my kind of AT style tires, but I do have some really nice aggressive ones that I've had for a while. I've got a few that I'm thinking may work, but we're gonna rule these out or rule them in shortly here. So these are all basically the same tire. They're just 4 different brands. So we've got Endura's brand new, I think this is a Super Stomper, but this is a Baja Pro X knockoff. And you've got RC 4-wheel drive with the licensed Baja Pro X. And then next we've got Proline with a licensed Baja Pro X. And then we've got lastly LGRP, the 57mm Swamp King, which is kind of a similar, maybe unlicensed Baja Pro X. I would say it's similar, but it's got some differences. So you can see here, those are pretty comparable, the Proline and the 57mm from Little Guy. And then this Endura is just crazy wide. So that may rule that one out. And then, let's see, height-wise, these are a little tall. Well, that Endura is pretty close. And then the RC 4-wheel drive is probably the narrowest and the shortest here. So that may push us actually to this one. So I think height-wise, this is already just a hair taller than these boggers. And it's definitely already wider. If we set it up here, that may be the determinant. So it's quite a bit wider already. So I think because these are all taller, that's going to cause some problems on the front end. So I think that probably makes the decision, and I'll save these 3 bad boys, which, man, this new Endura, it's got that new compound, feels really good, really good. All I hear about this Pro X from Proline is that it's awesome. So this is one I have not tried, it feels really good. And then of course, I haven't run this either, the 57 Swamp King. I've run the big one and love it. So these all look like great tires. I know this is a great tire. I've run this already, so I think this will be a great option. So I'm gonna go ahead and mount that up to my nice polished set of vintage Trio wheels, and we'll see what it looks like. Well, got a lot back here out on the table, and that's because I made a little discovery when I was mounting up this second set of wheels and tires. So it's a little taller, maybe a millimeter, a little bit wider, a couple millimeters maybe than these. And that seemed to be just enough to really get me in trouble as far as the front fender clearance at full lock. So I'm just mid tire, but at full compression, I'm just really crushing it. Full lock, full compression. There's no way I could be spinning that tire compressed like that. So started looking at it and I thought, hey, let me switch back to these kind of non-offset hubs that the Trios come mounted up with. So that's what this side is. So that took a little bit of width out, but I still have the +4, and that seemed to be perfect for the front. You can see here now I'm getting basically in the fender well instead of hitting midway on the tire. So my clearance is much better. And of course this is the largest tire, so it's catching just a little bit, but nothing like it was, much better. And it can be driving and compress and actually turn and swing into the fender, which it couldn't on this scenario here. So plus I just kind of like the look. I don't like as much this width, you know, just all this space here, especially with a narrow tire. I feel like this looks a little better. And the critical zone, as always, in the back is checking against the fender, the bed here, and so I can get up and I still have perfect wiggle. So that was exactly really what I wanted to begin with, just a little more width. So gonna match the offset to this side, bring these in. Gonna do the same thing to this set, so that'll tuck those in. And what that did was make me realize I can actually use the original wheels I had planned for this build. So these are DJ Crawler. These are in a matte finish, which I really like, and I think they look really good against kind of the flat paint scheme here versus the polished. So I can get a good shot here, but they're, you know, they're just not, they're not as chromy, I guess, reflective. They're just a nice little satin matte. But anyways, I thought they had a good old school kind of classic look for the build. So anyways, now with these tucked back in, I threw these on since they don't have an adjustable hub. So that's why I threw them out to begin with. I couldn't even clear the bed. So these fit now perfectly with the +4s. So I'm gonna have 3 alternates for this. So the tires I have are some new ones that I've had just for a little bit here. These are the J-Concept Tusks in the green compound. So I had some landmines in the gold, and those are really stiff. So this is a nice soft compound, and these rings are vented in the wheels. So I just have the stock foams, and they feel really good. A little bit wider than I think the boggers. They're more on the width of these guys, but of course they're a lot smoother. They don't have the lugs. And these are about 52 millimeters versus, I think these are 56s or what's on here. And with the weight and the soft foams, they, you know, they sit a little bit lower. So these are really pretty comparable. They're not too far off. So anyways, I'm gonna mount up, I think, this 3rd set and rectify all the hubs on the wheels I've already got. And then I think we'll be done with wheels and tires. All right, got this 3rd set of rims mounted up, got the roof and the grille glued in, and man, I think these DJ Crawler wheels may be my favorite of the 3. Maybe because they're just less common than the Trials, but I think they look really good in this satin. Just awesome. So got everything kind of skinnied up a little bit with the hub adjustments on these, and then these just sit in more, but I think that looks a lot better. And of course, got plenty of clearance here at the front and plenty here at the rear, no issues. So that's working out really well. And one thing I did notice mounting these Tusks up was looking at the tread pattern. It's also looks like it's a knockoff of the Baja Pro X. So I'll show a photo of these close up together. But you can see the similarities in the tread pattern. It looks like this one's just really scaled down. So it doesn't have the big chunky kind of side biters, but definitely the lug pattern looks very, very similar. So I think now with all 3 tires kind of set up, everything glued in, I think we're ready to get this guy on the scales with at least one version of the Trials, and then these DJ Crawlers, see if there's any difference, and get a battery in there and see what the bias ended up being. Well, some pretty good numbers right there on the weigh-in. So either set of wheels, it was what, 58-42 front bias, so that is pretty good right there. And then I believe it was about a 10-gram difference with the heavier battery between the wheels, so 510 to 520-ish range. So not super heavy, but definitely not super light. And speaking of not being super light, one thing I noticed picking it up on and off the scales was this nose was pulling up off of the magnet pretty easily just due to the weight of this front end. So because I've got another one in the other room, I went in there and grabbed one of the magnets and I just slid it under this magnet here. So that's giving more power basically. So now I'm not really having that issue. I can drop it on here and shake this guy and it's holding it just fine. So that's something you may want to consider if you're going to go a little heavier on the front. You may want to double up the magnets. Didn't want to stack it on top because that would actually raise the nose Putting it under the bottom just stops the servo a little bit shy of how far it could go, so I can just adjust these shock mounts to stop the shocks at a bump stop, but other than that, there's really no difference there. I'd rather keep this nose very well secure, especially if this thing rolls. Don't want that body to come apart. But man, I'm just super happy with this, and like I showed, I got these scale hubs on there, and I like these because they're just black on the ends. There's no branding like in Jura or some of the other scale hubs. So these were just some I found on Amazon, but I think those kind of tie it all together. But I think before we take a kind of a final look at it, I think I'm going to put this set of wheels back on there. All right, got the wheels swapped back out, got the battery in, and I think we are ready for a final tabletop test here. So we're going to use this as a hinge, which is super convenient. Drop that back down, and we are ready to go here. Nice. Let's creep it back. So it's definitely got the slow. Look at that, nice and slow. Good squish on that compound. Really liking that green compound. Let's see if we bottom out here on the belly. Yep, you can see those rear tires lifting, we're sliding. But no problem for the BAM. Just pull it right on up. So I can back this down. I've got a touchy reverse trigger finger here. We're gonna smack. Yep, get those links. But that's the price you pay for a little more length. So that's why I was trying to go a little bit taller tire, but just the nature of this front end and the front fender and the pinch, it just kind of dictates about how tall you can go. And the two other alternates back there may even still be just a hair too tall. So I think in hindsight, probably a 50 to 52, 53 might be the size to use. Man, that's some good responsive squish on that compound. Look at that rear flex, just get up above the bed. That is just awesome. Man, I'm gonna fall off the end here. I'm really liking those ice blue headlights as well. Those look really, really clean. You can see them right there, bam. Just something a little different than the traditional, but I think they look really good against the blue. So man, just super happy with this. So, all right, enough playing around, it works. Here we are again at the end of another build, and I gotta say, I am extremely pleased with this. From the body, to the wheel selection, to the chassis, I am just super happy with this. I think it came out great. Just exactly what I envisioned, just kind of that classic FJ look, and I think it got pulled off quite well. And yeah, besides a few little hurdles there with the knuckle and getting the correct axle width, pretty smooth build overall. Got the same little snub nose frame rails that I did on the other FJ. So just super, super nice, very compact layout here, plenty of space in this one. But man, if you have not checked out one of these WTMicro bodies, I highly suggest you do, because you will not be disappointed. These things are just incredible, just awesome quality, really fun to build up and just, you know, figure out a look. A lot of the fun is just figuring out a paint job, figuring out the colors you want. But man, I think I'm going down this hard body road pretty full on now. Having a lot of fun here. It's bringing me back to my 1/24th plastic model kit building days. So just really fun for me to do builds that are like this. And I really like painting from the outside versus Lexan painting from the inside. I can do that well, but it's just a lot of patience and masking, and just the outside is so much easier. You can touch up when you paint from the outside, you can fix mistakes a lot easier than painting from the inside. So just a good way to do it. I definitely recommend, if you haven't done a hard body, definitely try one. If it's not a WTMicro, pick another one up. There's a lot of good little small companies out there and lots of files you can print to try, but just looks awesome, I think. And like I said, these tires may be reaching for the sky here, maybe a little bit taller than this can handle at full lock, full compression. And wouldn't you know it, the mail arrived today, so I got my hot racing oil long travel shocks I like, and I got 2 Boom Racing tires here, so a 52 and a 53, the TPD and the Hustler Extreme. So these may end up getting swapped in versus these 56, 55 and a half. So that would bring down the height a little bit and help with this clearance. Plus these Boom Racing tires are just incredibly soft, so they squish up. These are really nice. I'm really impressed with these. I'm definitely going to pick up the landmines in this compound. Just super nice. But anyways, as always, thank you for coming along on the build. I'm sure this one is going to add up to be a pretty long one, just the way things kind of unfolded here. But I hope you learned something along the way. I definitely did, as always. Always some new surprises. You know, you just never know what you're going to come up against, but it's never too much to handle. So anyways, I guess until next time, thanks for watching.